People who speak multiple languages, have you ever had funny experiences when someone didn't expect you to understand their language? I'm American, but know a little Russian. A few years ago, I was in St. Petersburg and decided to buy tickets for a boat ride to Peterhof. All the signs in the kiosk were in Russian, so I had no trouble studying all the prices. However, it was obvious I wasn't a local, so the crafty ticket seller decided to sell me tickets at 3 times the regular price. In response to this audacity, I looked her straight in the eyes and said in perfect Russian, "But the sign clearly says 1 ticket costs X." You should have seen her reaction. Her jaw almost dropped. Her colleague sitting next to her burst out laughing. As far as I know, this is quite a common story in Russia. One price for locals, another for tourists. I am half Peruvian, half Swiss, but I live in Peru. You'd never guess there's anything Swiss about me from my appearance. Once, I was on a bus and heard 2 Swiss girls behind me chatting about the attractiveness of Latinos. Suddenly, one of them asked if I seemed attractive to her friend. Without waiting for an answer, I turned around sharply and said, "Yes, I am curious to." It was hilarious. The expressions on their faces were priceless, full of embarrassment and confusion. Now, I have 2 new friends, Edit. They were speaking Swiss German. Edit 2, later, they admitted that they both found me attractive. When I was 16 and started working at McDonald's, I found myself in a Spanish-speaking team, and no one suspected that I also spoke Spanish quite well. Sometimes these guys would make very rude comments about me in Spanish, but I pretended not to understand. This went on until a few weeks into the job. The manager approached me and said that he was valued more than me because he knew 2 languages. To which I immediately replied in Spanish, "Cool, but I know 3. The guy was shocked when he realized I had understood their conversations all along. While I was in Germany, my English teacher friend she teaches at a middle school invited me to her school for one of her classes. She introduced me to the students, I greeted them, said I was from the US, and was happy to be there. Then my friends said, "Guys, you can ask him questions in English. What do you think Americans are like?" Some kid in the front row decided to joke in German, fat and stupid. He tried to say it quietly, but everyone heard him. The teacher blushed, the students laughed. I didn't know what to do, so I quickly switched to German. "You're right?" And many Americans speak German too. The kid was so shocked. At that moment, he looked like a deer caught in the headlights. He really didn't think Americans could understand German. My friends and I went shopping at a mall. While I was in the fitting room, 2 store employees were standing nearby, trash-talking me in Spanish. They were annoyed that I was taking too long to change, calling me a dumb gringo foreigner, and occasionally asking in English if I needed help. They didn't know I had Spanish roots. So, when I came out of the fitting room and said in perfect Spanish that no, I didn't need help, they were mortified. I am an American expat in Thailand, and I have a big beard that attracts a lot of attention. The locals, not suspecting that I understand them, sometimes like to shout things like, "Look, a monkey. A monkey, want a banana," or some other nasty comments. Usually, I just ignore it because I don't want to talk to them. But there was one time I couldn't hold back. 2 young girls around 14 years old started following me, constantly making monkey comments. They were running around, shouting, and annoying me. I stopped, looked directly at them, and said in perfect Thai, "Blue-eyed monkeys don't exist. They have black eyes, like yours." They were speechless. I don't speak Spanish much, but I understand everything without a problem. I used to deal with used cars in Houston, and, as you might have guessed, often dealt with Spanish-speaking customers. They never asked if I spoke Spanish because I look like a typical white guy who knows nothing but English. It was funny to watch couples approach me and discuss their price haggling schemes right in front of me. I always knew their sneaky tactics and how much they were actually willing to pay. I often overheard phrases like, "I'll try to knock off $1,000, but if he agrees to at least $500, we'll take it anyway." After we settled on a price, I waited for the right moment to jump into their conversation and show that I understood them the whole time. Usually, they were shocked, and you could read "you little bastard" on their faces. Those moments were just priceless. Even though I'm Spanish, you wouldn't know it by looking at me. I have fair skin, light hair, and green eyes. When I lived in London, I often found myself in funny situations. My favorite is when I once took the subway home from work. There was a big football match that day, Chelsea versus Barcelona, and I ended up on the train with a couple of fans on their way to the game. At one point, the train came to a sudden stop, and I lost my balance and fell a bit onto one of them. Since I didn't know they were Spanish, I apologized to the guy in English. We continued riding. For the next 5 minutes, he relished the situation in Spanish, saying things like, "That fat prick better fall to the floor." Soon we approached their stop. They got off the train still mocking me, and I shouted after them in perfect Spanish, "Enjoy the game, ush holes." They were stunned. The door closed right in front of them. God, I enjoyed that for probably a week afterward. I was walking with a German friend in Italy and warned him in German, "Bro, you shouldn't trash talk people like that. You never know who might understand us here." A woman walking next to us added, "Yeah, like me." There was a Chinese takeout place near our college campus where everyone spoke Chinese. Even though I also know Chinese, I always spoke to them in English because I'm a bit self-conscious about my accent. Usually, I get rice with meat from them, but this time I already had rice at home, so I just wanted the meat. I went in, made my order without rice, and handed over the money. Then I heard the cashier shout to the kitchen staff in Chinese, "This fat ass only wants meat, no rice." I heard this very clearly and decided to respond in Chinese. That's right, I have plenty of rice at home. Ever since then, they always give me extra, and they didn't charge me a cent for that order. My friend and I were trying to get home after drinking, but it was far, and we didn't have much money. So we found other women who needed to go the same way and suggested sharing a taxi. They agreed, we called a taxi, and off we went. Suddenly, they started talking in Swedish, not knowing that my friend is half Finnish, half Swedish. I also understand Swedish, but I was so drunk at that moment that I didn't care. Suddenly, my friend texted me, "They don't plan to pay for the taxi." I replied, "Maybe we should tell the driver." My friend turned to the driver and said, "Don't let these two out until they pay their half." He got the hint, locked all the doors, and they had to pay up. I lived in South Korea for 3 years, but hardly learned any Korean. During that time, I met an English-speaking Korean woman who everyone thought wasn't local because she was very tall and spoke with a strong American accent, which she picked up while studying in the US and New Zealand. When she went to finish her studies at an international university in South Korea, her professors assumed she didn't speak Korean and often insulted her right in front of her. She felt very uncomfortable but didn't show it and endured it for a whole year, until graduation. At the graduation ceremony, she stepped onto the stage in front of an audience of 800 people and delivered her speech in perfect Korean, casually reminding her professors how they called her a foreign pig. According to witnesses, one of the professors broke down and cried from shame on the spot. I wish I could have seen that. I lived in Korea for a while. I went to get a haircut, and the assistant hairdresser seated me in the chair, preparing me for the haircut. I overheard her telling the hairdresser, "Wow, he looks like a baby." I was 22 at the time, but I did indeed look very young. I then asked, "Who, me? I look like a baby." She became very embarrassed and quickly ran off somewhere. However, the hairdresser found out that I understood Korean, so we switched to speaking Korean. My aunt and I were flying to a resort for vacation. We were sitting in the airport, chatting in Finnish, waiting for our flight. My aunt had a broken leg, so she was in a wheelchair the whole time. An important note, although we are both Finnish, my aunt has been living in Germany for several years and is fluent in German. I also lived there for a bit, but am not as proficient in the language. Finally, it was time to board. The flight attendant saw that my aunt was in a wheelchair and offered us to board first. Nearby stood an annoyed German couple, and I could hear the husband say to his wife, "I think they should ban disabled people from flying altogether." My crazy aunt asked me to stop. I was pushing her wheelchair, turned to the man, and replied in perfect German, "Excuse me, sir, but no fracture can take away my vacation. What you said is very insulting to disabled people. I sincerely pity your wife. Have a good flight." Without a word, the man blushed and turned away. His wife was in shock. My stepmother's story: she grew up in Japan, speaks Japanese, but looks like a white Italian. She's only a quarter Japanese and doesn't look like the typical residents of Asian countries. One time, she decided to treat her friends to a little bachelorette party and took them to a salon for manicures and pedicures. The women working in the beauty salon were speaking Japanese and mostly gossiping about men and such. But when it was time for my stepmother's pedicure, they suddenly switched their attention to her. The thing is, she's not the slimmest woman, and her feet aren't exactly model-like. The workers noticed this and started mocking her in Japanese, of course. They were giggling and enjoying the fact that someone was less fortunate in looks than they were. My stepmother said she initially didn't want to react, but after 5 minutes of continuous trash talk, her patience ran out, and she finally responded in their language. "You know, I didn't think this place only served princesses." Maybe not word for word, but something like that. The smiles on the workers' faces quickly turned to endless guilt. They apologized in English and didn't say another word until the procedure was finished. I had one funny incident in Japan. I was walking down the street and heard, "Oh, look at him, he's so hot, and he's got blue eyes." My self-esteem soared to the heavens. I turned my head to check out my admirers, and there, tiny 13-year-old school girls who looked even younger because ... Well, you know, Asians. After that, it wasn't so pleasant anymore. I'm Brazilian, but I've spoken English since I was young, so I can easily pass for an American if I don't talk too much. Once, I had to fly from Atlanta to Rio. At the airport, I met two very beautiful girls who spoke excellent English and were traveling with their mom. As I later found out, they were Americans with Brazilian roots and also thought I was just an American. We chatted a bit, exchanged pleasantries, and it turned out that one of the girls had a ticket for the seat next to mine. Later, we boarded the plane. I put my luggage in the overhead bin, and I heard their mom say to them in Portuguese, "Poor guy, he thinks I'll let him sit next to one of you." To which I turned to her and replied also in Portuguese, "Don't worry, ma'am. I have a girlfriend, so I will be delighted to share this flight with you." Her, oh, and she sat the whole flight without saying a word. Thanks for watching. In the comments below, tell us if you've ever had a funny experience when someone didn't expect you to understand their language. And don't forget to check out our other awesome videos.